Hello, hello. Today we are working in a sketchbook, or I'm working in a sketchbook. You're working in whatever you want, and I'm sketching a scene from Florence, which is a street scene. You should have the reference photo attached to this post on Patreon. And I'm going to show you my sketching process as if I was on location, trying to talk you through my process, how I would sketch it was I on location. Just first of all, the composition. I do take photos sometimes for a reference, but it's almost always needing some work afterwards for the sketch, because instead of sketching things as they are, I'm kind of designing them as I go. And you'll see some of my thinking process behind this sketch. Let's start. On the photo, the backside of the wall is kind of in the middle of the photo, and I'm going to change it because I'm going to follow this rule of thirds, which means that a composition is the classical composition, at least, is best when it's located, when the main element is located on either of the lines of the or the crossings of a page divided into thirds. So that means that my wall will be in the end somewhere here. And that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna just have it here. It's we don't see the sky because the buildings are tall, the street is narrow, and this kind of composition is going to enhance this sense of you being on the bottom of a very deep street, a very narrow street. Houses are crowding above your head. So I'm going to take my food pen. For those of you who haven't seen the videos on my materials yet, I talk a lot about the materials I use in some of the previous posts. This is a Sailor food pen from Japan. I don't remember the angle of it, but this angle comes in this kind of green color. They have black barrel pen and they have green, so mine is green. So I'm going to sketch the outlines of the streets and put right away the biggest and darkest element that I see is the rooftop, and I exaggerated it a little bit, pushing it out a little bit more, making it a little bit bigger. And then this is my main composition. The most interesting things are going to be happening around this area. The rest is not as important. We have a sliver of light going behind. I will pull the walls a bit down so we have a little bit of the bottom of the street. And then we have a motorbike that will become my what's the word? The foreground. It's called the foreground. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make this bigger. I'm going to make this bigger and I'm going to shift it as well. If you notice what I'm doing here, I'm drawing a shape of all the darks that are making this motorbike look like a motorbike, highlighting and outlining only the lines where the light and the dark are coexisting together, where there will be difference in the tone in my painting. I'm not going to draw the wheels inside, because if you look at it, it's barely visible, and in the long run, it's really not going to be so important. I'm also drawing as few lines as I possibly can, or rather, every line is just one line. If you notice, I almost never draw another line on top unless it is a double line in that's intended to be in the picture. That makes a sketch much cleaner and much more concise. Okay, here's our street. My eyes right now when I stand on this street is about here. How you know that? You imagine yourself standing facing that wall on the back, straight on, right? Your eyes, your line of sight is directed. So if that's the street, you're standing somewhere here, and you imagine yourself turning to look at the wall straight at a straight angle. And imagine that if you were standing near that spot, where your head would be. So for me, it would be somewhere here. That's going to be the point where your lines meet. That means that these lines goes there. This line go right here. And I'm not going to draw all of them, right? We don't need that. The more lines you draw, the more room for mistake you have. I'm just going to add some of the details without thinking too much about having too many of them, or are they completely precise? There's a mailbox, there is another door. And there is a window. And every time I need to draw a horizontal line, they all meet in this one spot. Then I can outline the door on the back. But the lines are going to be lighter, not as solid. And there will be less of details in there. I'm going to ignore the bicycle. I'm going to add this element here. And if you noticed, I shifted that sign up because the way it was located almost on the edge of the roof wouldn't do us any good. And I also made sure that there is that sliver of light in here still staying. And then these horizontal lines are roughly in the perspective. I just use my eyes to do that. The first one, it indicates the texture of the pavement, the texture of the stones, without really drawing every stone. So what I do is I draw one line close, one line further, and one line double the distance, and that's pretty much enough. But it indicates the pavement and the kind of rough, a little bit of a steep shape of it. just enough for us to believe it's a pavement. Then obviously the windows will be visible. I do like crossing the lines when I draw them. You'll notice this in a lot of drawings that are done by current or former architects. It creates a nice sharp edge, and that's quality of the drawing. That kind of tells you that the person has studied architecture or done some kind of architecture or design. You don't have to, but I feel that it helps to give more structure to the sketch. Some kind of element here, which I'm not going to detail a lot. And another window on top. And then I have a little bit of an element here that will help me to highlight this wall a little bit. And add a tiny bit of interest and the complexity. And then you see this element. There are similar elements going on in this scene that I would like to keep for the sake of supporting the element that I already have, which is this tube. So I'm going to just draw it in darker, and it's gonna go down here. So we have a little bit of a rhythm of these things. And then we have windows here. These lines are still pointing in the direction, roughly in the direction of these spots. So are the lines of the shutters. Also, don't forget that when you're dividing a rectangle that is in a perspective, you're not dividing it in the middle, on the visual middle, you're dividing it closer to the edge. But if you don't, it's not going to be very crucial. I'm already far from being realistic on this, but if you notice that the windows are kind of randomly, almost randomly placed, so that's what I'm doing. I'm just adding some window-like elements that will tell a person that there was something weirdly spaced here. And here I'm only drawing out the outline of the shadow itself and not the door frame, because that's not important. What I'm going to do though is to have that lantern that we see and move it closer. Because again, if you notice on the photo, the left edge of the lantern meets the wall. So it's not a great composition, and I would want that lantern to be whether in the wall, which might not make a lot of sense because all my interest is going on here, or leave it out completely, which I don't want to do, or it sticks out here, and I think that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna see where it is. It's gonna be roughly, I'm gonna just move it closer. And I'm going to stick it right out here. And there are a few elements on the wall that are kind of repeating, but not quite, and I will make sure there's some of them in here. There are some lines. What I'm doing now is I'm adding some kind of sense of rhythm in here by repeating elements. You see when I'm saying that an edge of the element shouldn't come to an edge of another element, that's what I did here. So that will have to go out a little bit further. And then I'm just going to randomly erase some of the lines. Adding that urban texture in a way. Okay. I'm using my usual palette for the color. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to block out the darks. I'm going to use Phthalo Blue. Nice transparent but staining colors, so keep in mind that if you need a possibility to lift the color that you're using, this is not a good one to use. And then I'm going to use Quinacridone Rose, which is kind of semi-opaque color, so it's not going to make me a nice dark shade, but dark enough, because after all the dark and light are done by comparison. And I think I need a second jar of water here. Give me a sec. Assuming you sketch on location, you don't have the luxury of having a large color palette and stuff, so I'll try to keep my color minimum. And also, you don't want to spend a lot of time on that because things are changing, people are moving, and you want to get out of the people's way as soon as you possibly can. If you notice, I have two wells of the same yellow. The reason being is that I don't have to be afraid to stain my yellow and not have my proper lights afterwards. Okay, I have a fairly dark gray here, like a blue-gray kind of stuff. And what I'm going to do right away, very easy, just go over all the dark. including the motorbike, which is right in front, and this means it's in the shadow. And then I'm going to start adding the yellow and red in here, which will become a reflection. And then more yellow right from the tube. And then I'm taking the same mix. I'm taking the same mix and I'm adding the shadows. Here, just taking out some of the liquid, some of the darkness. I'm just going over the front things with too many details to be a bit too fussy. Don't need that. We can add a darker shadow here. The trick here is to make this darker than this, or vice versa. Something has to be darker, right? Something needs to be offset. All the nearby elements need to be considered, whether it should be lighter or darker than the other elements that it touches. This is an accident, but I think it's a happy accident actually, because that creates some kind of like reflective highlight that might have happened from the light falling onto some glass nearby here, or maybe an advertising board or whatnot. And then I mix a little bit of green with Aurelin and phthalo, and I add some color in the shutters right away. Not painting them, just adding the shade of it. Oh, how to, like, just splotches of color here and there, roughly structured the way the lines are. going to mix a lighter color, which would still comprise out of the same colors that I already use, which is Aurelian and Quinacridone Rose, right from this petal that already has a blue in it. Actually, I'm gonna try to make a bit of a cleaner mixture. You see here, it's a bit cleaner. It's a clean Aurelian yellow and a cleaner side of the blob of Quinacridone. I'm just going to draw these shadows. Just bringing the top a bit down. We don't need the sun up there because most of it is going to be on the bottom. We need to highlight this sliver of light a bit more and just imagining the shadows falling across on that wall that was morning. Bringing a bit of a darker shade on the bottom here, highlighting this. And I'm just mixing the tiny bit of phthalo green, just very transparent. And just lay it underneath on two sides. Wiping it up, so there is a tiny bit of tinge of green here, but not enough to notice, so it still looks white. I'm gonna take back my dark mixture. I'm going to add some textures and some more darks on the front. Going around these white areas. Oh, I forgot some of them, but that's okay. Highlighting the pavement here, you see how this light popped immediately, and then mixing the shadows in together. I'm gonna paint this one darker, but the top of the sign will stay lighter than its surroundings. That's what I mean by being conscious of what element is lighter, what element is darker when they intersect. And where we have light, there is always, that's where you have your darkest darks. So by adding some darks where there should be, where the light comes. I can't really paint and talk, but basically if you have light and you need to highlight it, you need to put just a few darker elements near that light, because the light is what is not, like it's a contrast, right? That's all it is. You don't have to have black for that, as long as your contrast between your dark and your light is strong enough to give out that effect. Okay, that's almost it. I'm going to just go a bit brighter, just a tiny bit brighter, and add a few details. For example, a brighter door that will offset the shape of this scooter, and this time I will go around the little details that I have. Add a few dots of similar color here and there. Actually, that also doesn't work. I'm not going to add anything else on top of what I already have. So there we have it. Although, let me just add just a little detail here on the scooter. And there we have it. That's the way I sketch. I often start with the line work on location for sure, and then sometimes I just paint using memory, and you have to agree that this is not difficult to remember. You start with the gray, blue or violet and progress into a lighter shade of that gray and a warmer shade of that gray, and on the back you would usually remember what colors were there. And I know it's scary to imagine and to let yourself just paint and assume and paint, because sometimes you will add too much color or too little color, and it's scary. But the more you do that, the better you become at finishing up things from memory, and that would, in my opinion, make your sketches way better than if you try to copy the colors from the photos later. Of course, if you have a chance to do this on location, this is much easier to do than painting that from the photos. So if you have a photo you're stuck with and you have line work done, that's how I do that. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next video.